Hi, I'm Michael Lynch. I am a professor of philosophy at the University of Connecticut, where I direct the Humanities Institute. And today I'm here with Robert Talisse from Vanderbilt University to talk about some of our new podcast and its placement in this project that we're launched with funding from the Henry Luce Foundation at UConn called The Future of Truth. So, Rob, I think we would both agree that with Hannah Arendt's old thought that it sometimes seems like in the nature of things that truth and politics are at war with one another. But I think a lot of us, and a lot of people maybe listening to this and watching this, will probably get the idea too that maybe it's a war that truth has been losing. At least it's not been winning a lot of the battles in recent years. And part of what the Future of Truth project is trying to do is to figure out why that's the case and what is the role that notions like truth and evidence and fact, what role should they play in democratic politics? So the Future of Truth project includes a lot of different parts. One part is an exhibition with the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, which is trying to tease out the role that art and science play together and apart in constructing how we think about reality and truth, both politically and non-politically. And another key part of this project is, of course, this podcast, Why We Argue. And I'm really delighted to be here today to talk to you a little bit about that project. Could you tell us a little bit about the podcast?
Sure. So the idea of the podcast is pretty straightforward. Each episode is roughly 20 to 30 minutes long. It's a freewheeling, unscripted conversation that I conduct each episode with a different guest. And the guests run the gamut from professional philosophers working in some what we might think of as technical areas of philosophy, having to do with some of the topics, Michael, that you just mentioned, truth and evidence. Particularly sometimes working on those topics with respect to conspiracy theories and how conspiracy theories work and how they get into our heads and why they're popular. But other guests are historians, such as Sophia Rosenfeld, who works on the history of this somewhat tense relation between democracy and truth. Scholars of presidential rhetoric, like Jennifer Machea, who has written a wonderful book about the presidential rhetoric of Donald Trump and how, or I might say why, presidential speech matters. In addition, I've been speaking to some moral philosophers like Maisha Cherry about the role of rage, the legitimate role of rage in democratic politics and forgiveness. Colleen Murphy, who's a legal scholar who works on what's called transitional justice. The field of transitional justice is the field that studies not what justice requires per se, but how an unjust society becomes more just in the wake of national trauma or human rights abuses and these sorts of things. And also, I think our first episode will kick off the new season. The political scientist Melvin Rogers and I talk about sort of political reckoning as a necessary condition for political progress. And there we talk about a theme that's actually come up pretty frequently with all the guests, which is the role, and as you put it, Michael, before, the future of truth has something to do with its past, remember? And so one of the themes that keeps coming up and is pretty central to the discussion with Melvin Rogers is the need for a country's moving forward to first take account of how it got to where it is, which requires looking back. So the future of truth is kind of also a backward-looking project as well as a forward-looking one.
So one thing that's really interesting about that point that comes out in the Melvin Rogers is, and the point that you just focused on, is the thought that in order to perhaps understand the future of truth, we're also going to have to realize that under that project, understanding that is going to help us perhaps reach some, if it's possible, reconciliation. Those words, truth and reconciliation, are often go together for obvious reasons in great recovery projects for democracies and countries that are trying to emerge out of trauma. And in one way, I think it's not surprising that we're going to see in some of these discussions of the possibility or impossibility of reconciliation, because reconciliation and dealing with the truth have not just a long history together as concepts, but a history in the lived human experience.
One of the upshots of this series of conversations, for me at least, has been encouraging in the following sense. If one thinks, as I happen to think, that part of the broader crises that we face as a democracy has to do with, another theme from Arendt. Part of the crisis has to do with our resistance to thinking, our resistance to seeing the complexity, to acknowledging the complexity. Part of our crises have to do with our commitment to the laser focus, the never blinking, the snap judgment, the instant like or dislike on social media. It strikes me that as a result of some of the conversations I've been having, that it's not so difficult to sort of reignite the kind of wonder, in a way, the kind of wonder that we might have lost sight of in the midst of all the rough and tumble of politics. We might have lost sight of the fact that there are still questions worth asking about what the real meaning of our fundamental values is. And it strikes me that creating the conditions under which citizens can be encouraged to every once in a while just take a step back and just do a little reflecting on how the commitments that they're so exercised over fit together, and where they came from, and how they formed their commitments. Maybe it's naive because I'm a philosopher, but I think that can go a long way. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds exactly right. It reminds me of Oscar Wilde's remark that the truth is never pure and rarely simple. And I think that's probably right about the truth about truth as well, and its relationship to all this democratic lived experience that we've been talking about. I think these sorts of podcasts and these sorts of thinking that you're doing out loud with your guests is really a way to appreciate that complexity. And as we were talking before, that can give rise to creativity. I think it's a really remarkable series of conversations, and I'm really looking forward to listening to all of them.